going to discuss, I think, the 5 most important things you need to know if you're about to buy an old sled or you own an old sled. This will help you troubleshoot. This will just help you keep it going. It'll help you from burning it up and burning it down. So here we go. And this is a good time to make a video for anybody that owns an old sled or is buying one. And these are kind of need to know things. It's pretty basic. A lot of people know this, but some people don't. So the first thing you've got to be able to know is how to test for spark. So if you can see what I've done here, you just take the spark plug boot off, ground it, find a ground, and pull the machine over, and you can actually see if it sparks out the end. So there, that's number 1. Test it for spark. Now, if you don't have spark, you need to, I find the number 1 problem with an old sled is anything plastic or electrical seems to be a real trouble issue. So if you can bypass the old wiring, like on this old Arctic Cat, you can pull a plug off, you split the plug, and then you bypass all the wiring in the handlebars, everything like that, and then you can eliminate that issue. And depending what sled you have, there's a lot of information on how to do that. So you have to be able to know how to test for spark and bypass your electrical. So now once you've bypassed your electrical and you still don't have spark, you pretty much got to know how to test your stator, because the stator is the piece of equipment that gives your sled fire. So it's pretty simple. Again, on your particular sled, you can Google all that stuff up, but you just take the plug from the stator, you unplug it, find out your specs on the internet, test it with an ohm meter, and make sure your stator is good. I find that's pretty much the number 1 issue with most old sleds is the stator fails or gets weak and you don't have any spark or you don't get good spark, and that becomes a big issue. So that's the number 1 thing I think is you got to be able to know how to test your electrical system, test for spark, test your stator, and from there that'll answer a lot of questions on what parts you need and what needs to be done. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so now that we've figured out how to test for spark and our electrical system, and we've got good fire, now the next thing, one of the most common things, is fuel delivery. And it's kind of tough, like if you're trying to eliminate, oh, is it carburetors, is it this, is it that? So you need to know how to do a compression test. So basically you take a spark plug out, you can take them all out, you take a spark plug out and you put a compression tester in there. I have, this is just a basic cheap compression tester. You can rent these from a tool shop, or they're pretty cheap to buy, but it's good to have. And if you're buying a sled, bring one of these with. If they don't let you test it for compression, there's probably a reason. So you basically spin the spark plug out, you spin this end in where the spark plug goes, you pull it over, and it'll give you a spark plug, or it'll give you a compression reading. And on a triple, you want them all the same. Like, there's specs for different sleds, twins, all this and that, but you have to know if you've got compression, because 3 things that a sled needs is fuel, fire, and compression. So you got to know how to do a compression test, and once you got compression and you got spark, then you got to move on to the fuel system. All right, now we're going to move to the fuel system. You can see these carburetors are nice and clean. I've gone through them. I put new fuel lines on it. That's a huge issue with the old sled, sucking a little air. They get dry, they get brittle. It's very important to put new fuel lines on every couple years. So yeah, I've got brand new fuel lines on here, and I am going to, just because it's a pretty inexpensive fix, and I'm going to put a brand new Mikuni fuel pump on it. So you have to know how a fuel pump works. So a fuel pump, this is a triple, so it has 3 outlets. Each outlet feeds each carburetor fuel It's got one inlet from the fuel tank, and then it has a pulse line, which hooks up to the crankcase of the engine. Now that pulse line, super important. This has baffled me, myself, and a lot of other people. If you use that clear fuel line for the pulse line, when it pulses, it compresses, and it doesn't really pulse. And it's hard to figure out why your sled isn't working and what the issue is. You can have the carburetors apart many times, but you have to have a solid, rigid line for your pulse line that feeds your fuel pump. You have to know how a fuel pump works. So you got to be able to find your fuel pump. Clear lines really helps you out. On an old sled, there's a couple of gaskets. Like, it's pretty cheap to rebuild these. I just bought a new fuel pump just because this thing is going for a couple 1,000-mile tour. So I'm going to put a new fuel pump on, and I'm going to put the correct lines on, and then our fuel scenario should be good. So another thing that is super important is you don't necessarily have to buy rebuild kits for carburetors, but you have to be willing to take a carburetor apart, clean it, make sure all the passages have flow, and be able to reassemble it. That's a big deal because they usually get gummed up, and nowadays with the fuel that around here anyways, the fuel doesn't last long. 6 months, it turns into syrup. It's not ideal. So you have to know how a fuel pump works, and you have to know how your carburetor fuel system works. So once you've got fire, you've got compression, you're going to need fuel, and it should basically fire right up, and it should keep you going. So that's the fuel part. Right, the next thing you got to know is how to read a spark plug. A lot of these old sleds do not have the fancy gauges that'll tell you if you're lean or you're rich or anything. You got to do it the old-fashioned way. You got to start it up, take it for a run, shut it off, pull the spark plugs out, look at the spark plug, and the spark plug will tell you how your machine is running. So I'll give you a quick little heads up on that. Right, so to read a spark plug, this is a brand new spark plug. So if you put a brand new spark plug in it, you run it for a bit, then you pull the spark plug out, it's going to turn a different color. So I have an old one here. This one, it's a pretty used plug. It's not bad. So if it was lean, it would be white. So if your spark plug comes out really light tan or almost white, it is running far too lean. So it needs more fuel, or it's sucking air somewhere. So that's a big telltale on that. And if the end of your spark plug is black, it is far too rich. So it needs less fuel. So those things are very important on an old sled because you have to see how it's running. Because if you don't have your jetting right and your spark plug burn is incorrect, you will burn your motor down. So if it's lean and white, that turns that cylinder into like a cutting torch. It'll burn a hole in your piston. And if it's too fat, it's just going to be nothing but problems. So learn how to read a spark plug. Pretty simple. Pull it out, have a look, see if it's wet, see if it's dry. It'll tell you a lot about what's going on. All right, so if we've got the engine figured out, we've got the electrical, we've got the fuel, we've got the compression, everything. Let's say we got the sled running good. Now the next most common scenario is they light on fire and they burn down. So, and it's usually the brake, because an old sled's neglected. So what I like to do is when you get the sled going, you lift up the back and you run the track, and then look underneath, see if your brake's hanging up. Just visual inspection. Do a really good visual inspection, and that'll tell you a lot about the running gear on the sled. So I'm going to swap my fuel pump and do all this and that I need to have done. Then I will take this thing outside and I'll show you what I mean. All right, well, I've got all my parts put together. I've got it running pretty nice. I've already lifted the back up. I've run the track. I tested everything. I checked the brake. I put my hand on the actual brake caliper, make sure it wasn't getting hot or anything like that. And she's ready to go. I've owned this sled for over a dozen years. This thing is just A lot of people don't understand it, but they ask, why would somebody want to buy that sled? It stock makes 150 horsepower, and stock it goes over 100 miles an hour. And this one's got performance reed valves, it's got performance pipes, the carburetors are tip top, and it's got air boxes eliminated, it's got good air pods on there. So yeah, it's a rush. Like these old sleds, it's just like all motor. So the fellow that's buying this thing, he's going to stud this track, and that's what this sled does. It just spins. But if you stud it and ride it on ice, this thing's going to haul the mail. So I'll get my camera set up here and show you exactly why I love these old triples.